In the manicured gardens of the Blackwood estate, a devastated younger brother was about to face the cruelest truth of his life. What started as a grief-stricken walk through the family grounds took a shocking turn when he came face to face with his brother's predatory nature. Jamie Blackwood wasn't your typical family disappointment. For 26 years, he had spent his life pursuing art therapy instead of corporate success. Known for his compassion toward traumatized children and his quiet resilience. When he encountered Marcus delivering his brutal verdict, "You were the mistake, child," he had no idea he was walking into a revelation that would expose decades of family lies. Jamie's decision to seek DNA evidence would lead to the complete destruction of everything his family believed about themselves. What began as a painful inheritance dispute would become a reckoning with identity itself. The prestigious Blackwood legacy would never be the same after the DNA results revealed which brother was truly the mistake. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Because I loved him too. Because I thought, you thought what? Marcus stood, using his height advantage like in childhood arguments. That you could coast on good intentions and artistic sensitivity? That Dad would ignore 28 years of you choosing everything except this family's business? Eleanor finally spoke in her refined Connecticut accent. Boys, please, this is exactly what your father wouldn't have wanted. We're still grieving. These decisions don't have to be made today. But Marcus wasn't finished. Jamie saw something building in his brother's expression, cruel satisfaction that had lurked beneath the surface for years. You know what, Jamie? Maybe it's time someone said this out loud. Dad made his choice because he understood something the rest of us have been too polite to acknowledge. Marcus, stop. Eleanor's voice carried a warning from somewhere deeper than maternal concern. You were the mistake, child, Marcus said, each word landing with precision. Dad knew it, I know it, and deep down, you know it too. This will isn't unfair, it's honest. It's Dad finally acknowledging what's been obvious your entire life. You don't belong in this family's future because you never really belonged in this family at all. Deafening silence followed. Jamie felt the world tilt, reality's foundations shifting. He'd always sensed being the outsider, the son who never measured up. But hearing it stated so bluntly shattered something inside him. Eleanor's face went pale. Marcus, how could you say such a thing? Because it's true, Marcus replied, no longer meeting Jamie's eyes. Someone had to say it. Jamie walked toward the doors, movements mechanical. Behind him, Eleanor called his name, but her voice seemed distant. He needed air, space, anywhere but this room where his brother had stripped away his last vestiges of belonging. The estate's front door slammed behind him, echoing across manicured grounds. On the circular driveway, Jamie gulped crisp October air, trying to process what happened. The words echoed, "You were the mistake, child." 26 years of feeling like an outsider crystallized into devastating explanation. Every missed opportunity, subtle exclusion, every moment watching his family from behind glass, it all made terrible sense. Sarah Mitchell's Honda Civic appeared on the long driveway, her arrival timed with perfect intuition. She'd promised to stop by after the will reading, knowing he might need support. As she parked and stepped out, her expression shifted from gentle concern to alarm seeing his face. Jamie, what happened? He tried to speak, but words wouldn't come. Instead, he stood in his father's shadow, cast by the estate's imposing stone facade that would never be his, wondering if Marcus had revealed a truth everyone but Jamie had always known. October wind rustled through maple trees lining the driveway, their leaves the color of fire and blood, and Jamie Blackwood began to understand that everything he'd believed about his life might have been a carefully constructed lie. Like everyone's always known except me. Sarah's expression shifted through surprise, anger, and something else, a professional curiosity that made Jamie's pulse quicken. Jamie, that's a horrible thing to say. But you know Marcus lashes out when he's cornered. But what if he's right? The question escaped before Jamie could stop it. Sarah, I've never fit here. My whole life, I felt like I was watching my own family through glass. Every family photo, every business discussion, every holiday, I'm always slightly out of place, slightly wrong. 3 days later, Jamie sat in his small office at the Connecticut Children's Therapy Center, staring at his laptop screen. The DNA testing website glowed before him, promising answers to your family questions with clinical precision. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he couldn't bring himself to look away from the simple form that could shatter or confirm everything he'd always suspected. Childhood memory, age 12, overhearing Eleanor on the phone with her sister. Richard's always been harder on Jamie. I think he sees something in him that reminds Richard of his own father's disappointments. The conversation had stopped when Jamie entered the room, but Eleanor's guilty expression had stayed with him for years. The flashback hit him with unexpected clarity. He'd buried so many moments like that, conversations that stopped when he appeared, glances between his parents that he couldn't interpret, the way family discussions about the future always seemed to exclude him by default. Another memory, high school graduation. Marcus had received the family signet ring that had belonged to their grandfather, a tradition for the family heir. When Jamie asked about it later, Richard had mumbled something about family traditions evolving and quickly changed the subject. Jamie's phone buzzed. Sarah. How are you holding up? Want to grab lunch? They met at a small cafe in downtown Hartford, far from the Blackwood social circles where conversations were performed rather than genuine. Sarah studied his face across the small table, her professional training evident in how she waited for him to speak first. I keep remembering things that didn't make sense at the time but feel significant now. Sarah, you work with genetics every day. Theoretically, if someone wanted to know about biological relationships? Sarah set down her coffee cup carefully. Jamie, are you asking what I think you're asking? I don't know what I'm asking. He ran his hands through his hair, a nervous habit he'd inherited from someone, though now he wondered from whom. Marcus was so certain, so sure that I don't belong. What if there's a reason I've never felt like a real Blackwood? Genetic testing for paternity is straightforward, Sarah said quietly, shifting into counselor mode. But Jamie, you need to understand that some knowledge can't be unknown. Are you prepared for any result? That night, Jamie stood in the bathroom of the family estate, holding a plastic bag containing strands of Marcus's hair lifted from his hairbrush. His own saliva sample sat sealed in a testing kit on the counter. The clinical efficiency of it felt surreal. 26 years of family identity reduced to biological samples. Memory. Age 8, Jamie showing his father a painting he had created in art class. Richard had glanced at it briefly before saying, "Very colorful, son. Maybe you can show it to your mother." But Marcus's crude business plan for a lemonade stand had been framed and hung in Richard's study. Eleanor knocked softly on the bathroom door. "Jamie, are you all right, sweetheart? You've seemed distant since the will reading." "I'm fine, Mom," he called back, quickly hiding the DNA kit behind towels. "Just tired."
He heard her pause outside the door, and when she spoke again, her voice carried an odd strain. "I know this has been difficult. The will, what Marcus said, sometimes grief makes people cruel. Your father loved you, Jamie. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." The words should have been comforting, but something in Eleanor's tone, a desperate quality, almost pleading, made Jamie's suspicions deepen. She sounded like someone trying to convince herself as much as him. 2 days later, Jamie stood at the mailbox outside the DNA testing company's local office, holding the package that contained his samples and potentially his entire future. The October morning was crisp, leaves crunching under his feet as he hesitated. A businesswoman walked past, efficiently dropping her mail and continuing her day without a backward glance. For her, This was just another Tuesday. For Jamie, it was the moment he chose to seek truth over comfortable uncertainty. The package slid into the mail slot with a soft thud that seemed to echo disproportionately in the quiet morning. Jamie felt something shift inside him, terror and liberation warring in his chest. In 2 weeks, he would know whether Marcus's cruel words contained a truth that had been hidden from him his entire life. Walking back to his car, Jamie realized he'd crossed a line. Whatever the results revealed, he could never again be the Jamie who accepted his place without question. He was no longer content to be the family's afterthought, the mistake child who should be grateful for scraps. For the first time in his life, Jamie Blackwood was demanding answers. Part 3. The revelation that changes everything. 2 weeks felt like 2 years. Jamie had thrown himself into his work at the Children's Therapy Center, using art sessions with traumatized kids as a distraction from the ticking clock in his mind. Every day he checked his email obsessively, heart racing at notifications that turned out to be scheduling reminders or administrative updates. Then, on a gray Tuesday afternoon while he cleaned paintbrushes after a session with 7-year-old Emma, who'd been drawing her family with everyone holding hands except herself standing apart, the email arrived. "Your DNA results are ready for viewing." Jamie's hands trembled as he locked his office door and pulled up the website. The clinical interface felt impossibly sterile for something that might redefine his entire existence. He entered his login credentials twice, mistyping from nerves, before the results finally loaded. Paternity analysis complete. The screen filled with charts, percentages, and genetic markers that meant nothing to his untrained eye. Jamie scrolled frantically, looking for something definitive, something clear. Then he found it. A simple comparison chart that made his world stop spinning. Subject A, Jamie Blackwood. Probability of paternity with Richard Blackwood, 99.97%. Subject B, Marcus Blackwood. Probability of paternity with Richard Blackwood, 0.03%. Jamie stared at the numbers until they blurred. He blinked hard, certain he'd misread, but the figures remained unchanged. He was Richard Blackwood's biological son. Marcus was not. The irony hit him like a physical force. You were the mistake child. Marcus was so certain, so cruel in his conviction. But Marcus was the one who didn't belong, genetically, biologically, legally. Everything Marcus had built his identity around, every cruel word about Jamie's place in the family, had been based on a lie. Jamie's phone rang, making him jump. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up with the waiting?" "Sarah." His voice came out as a croak. "I got the results." Silence. Then, "I'm coming over." "No, I'm at the office." "Sarah, I need you to help me understand this."
The numbers, what they mean exactly. Read them to me. Jamie recited the percentages, hearing Sarah's sharp intake of breath when he reached Marcus's results. Jamie, those numbers are definitive. There's no margin for error with results like that. You are Richard Blackwood's biological son. Marcus is not. She paused, and he could hear her shifting into professional mode. This means, God, Jamie, this changes everything. He sank into his desk chair, staring at the cheerful children's artwork covering his walls. A pinker fingering of a rainbow by 8-year-old Marcus, not his brother, just coincidentally sharing the name, hung directly in his line of sight. Such innocent joy in those bold strokes. So different from the complicated reality of adult lives built on secrets. "How is this possible?" Jamie whispered. "My mother. She would have known. She's always known." Jamie, I need you to listen to me carefully. These results mean that legally, ethically, you're the rightful heir to your father's estate. The will was based on false assumptions about biological relationships. The legal implications crashed over him like a wave. The business, the estate, the 75% that had gone to Marcus, all of it based on a lie that had shaped both their lives. Marcus, who'd tormented him for being the outsider, was actually the one who didn't belong. Eleanor, who'd watched Jamie suffer years of subtle exclusion, had known the truth all along. Jamie stood abruptly, pacing his small office. I have to confront them. I have to know how long they've known. Jamie, wait. Think about this carefully. Once you reveal these results, you can't take it back. This will destroy Marcus, possibly your mother, too. Are you ready for that? But Jamie was already printing the results, the machine whirring to life with mechanical precision. Each page that emerged felt like evidence in a trial where he'd been both defendant and victim for 26 years. I've been ready my whole life, he said, surprising himself with the steel in his voice. I've spent years believing I was the problem, that something was fundamentally wrong with me. Marcus made me feel like I was lucky to even be tolerated by this family. Sarah, do you understand what this means? Every cruel word, every exclusion, every time I felt like I didn't belong, it was all based on a lie that my own mother perpetuated. He gathered the printed pages, his hands steadier now than they'd been all day. 26 years of self-doubt were crystallizing into something harder, more determined. I'm going to the estate, he announced, already reaching for his jacket. Jamie, maybe you should wait until tomorrow. Process this first. Process what? That my entire life has been a lie? That my brother built his identity on being the true heir while treating me like a charity case? That my mother watched it happen knowing the truth? He paused at his office door. No, Sarah.
I'm done processing. I'm done accepting. I'm done being the mistake child. The drive to the Blackwood estate felt surreal, as if he were watching someone else's life unfold. Jamie clutched the DNA results against the steering wheel, these simple pages that held the power to detonate his family's carefully constructed world. As he pulled into the circular driveway, Jamie realized he wasn't the same person who'd left this place 2 weeks ago, wounded and defeated. The DNA results had given him something he'd never possessed before, absolute certainty about his place in the family hierarchy. He was the rightful heir. He was Richard Blackwood's true son, and it was time everyone knew it. The heavy oak door of the Blackwood estate opened before Jamie could knock. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her usually perfect composure cracked around the edges. She'd been watching from the window, a habit from his childhood that had always made him feel simultaneously loved and scrutinized. Jamie, sweetheart, what a lovely surprise! But her voice carried a tremor that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. You look different. Where's Marcus? Jamie stepped inside without waiting for invitation. The DNA results folded in his jacket pocket like a loaded weapon. He's in the study, going over quarterly reports. Eleanor closed the door with unusual care, as if afraid the sound might shatter something fragile. Jamie, is everything all right? You seem... I need to speak with both of you, now. Something in his tone made Eleanor's carefully maintained smile falter completely. Jamie had never spoken to her with such authority, such certainty. For 26 years, he'd been the accommodating son, the one who bent to family expectations even when they excluded him. This Jamie was someone new. They found Marcus exactly where Eleanor had said, surrounded by financial documents in their father's study. Richard's presence still dominated the room. His awards, his books, his massive desk where Marcus now sat like a king claiming his rightful throne. Jamie, Marcus barely looked up from his papers. What brings you to the estate? Shouldn't you be finger-painting with traumatized children? The casual cruelty that once would have wounded Jamie now felt like confirmation of everything he'd suspected. We need to talk. All of us. Eleanor perched on the edge of a leather chair, her hands clasped in her lap with white-knuckled intensity. Perhaps we could schedule a family dinner for this weekend. I could make that salmon you like. Mom. Jamie's voice cut through her nervous chatter. Sit down. Please. Marcus finally looked up, irritation creasing his features. What's this about, Jamie? Some of us have actual work to do. Jamie pulled the DNA results from his jacket with deliberate slowness. The papers rustled in the sudden silence, and he watched Eleanor's face carefully. The moment her eyes fixed on the laboratory letterhead, her complexion went ashen.
She knew. Before he said a word, before he explained anything, Eleanor Blackwood knew exactly what those papers contained. "I had a DNA test done," Jamie announced, placing the results on Richard's desk between them. "I wanted to settle the question of my place in this family once and for all."
Marcus laughed, reaching for the papers with casual confidence. "Oh, this is rich. Jamie's so desperate to prove he belongs that he's resorted to—" His voice died as he read the first page. The color drained from his face as he flipped through the results, his eyes scanning the damning percentages again and again. "This is wrong," Marcus whispered, then louder, "This is wrong. These tests are notoriously unreliable. False positives, contaminated samples." "Marcus," Jamie's voice was steady as stone, "the probability of error with results this clear is essentially zero. I am Richard Blackwood's biological son. You are not." The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor had begun to cry, not the elegant tears of a grieving widow, but the raw, desperate sobs of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing. "Mom?" Jamie turned to her and his voice carried a new edge. "You don't seem surprised." Eleanor's composure shattered completely. "Jamie, please, I can explain." "You knew." The realization hit him like a physical blow. "You've always known." Marcus was still staring at the DNA results, his hands shaking slightly. "This can't be right. I'm the heir. I'm the one Dad trained, the one he trusted with everything." "You're not his son," Jamie said quietly, "which means you're not the rightful heir to anything." Eleanor stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the estate grounds. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "His name was David Chen. He was an artist I commissioned to paint my portrait. This was 29 years ago, when Richard and I were going through a difficult period. The confession spilled out like blood from a wound that had been festering for decades. Richard was working constantly, building the business, and I felt so alone. David was passionate, creative, everything Richard wasn't. It was only a few months, but—" Marcus stood so violently his chair toppled backward. "You're telling me my entire life has been a lie? That everything I am, everything I've worked for is based on deception?" "I thought I could make it right," Eleanor continued, her voice breaking. "When Marcus was born, Richard was so proud, so happy to have a son. I couldn't destroy that. And when Jamie came along 2 years later, I thought if I could just love you both equally."
Now back to the story. Equally? Jamie's voice rose for the first time. "Mom, you've favored Marcus every day of my life. Every opportunity, every advantage, every moment of pride and recognition went to him, while I watched from the sidelines." "Because I was trying to compensate." Eleanor whirled to face them, her perfect facade completely gone. "I knew Marcus wasn't Richard's biological son, so I convinced myself that giving him everything was protecting him, protecting all of us from the truth." Marcus had gone very still, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "So, while you were protecting your bastard son, you let me believe I was something I'm not. You let me build my entire identity on a lie. And you let me believe I was the mistake," Jamie added quietly. "You watched Marcus torment me for years, knowing that everything he said was projection of his own illegitimacy." Eleanor sank into a chair, looking suddenly fragile and old. "I thought I could take it to my grave. I thought if I just kept the secret long enough, it wouldn't matter anymore." Marcus grabbed his coat from the back of his chair, his movements sharp and mechanical. "I need air. I can't be here right now." "Marcus, please," Eleanor reached for him, but he pulled away. "Don't touch me. I don't even know who I am anymore." He looked at Jamie with something that might have been hatred or might have been devastation. "Congratulations, little brother. Looks like you finally got what you always wanted." The front door slammed with enough force to rattle the windows.
Through the study window, they watched Marcus's BMW tear down the driveway, gravel spraying in his wake. Eleanor turned to Jamie with desperate eyes. "Please, sweetheart, I know I've made terrible mistakes, but I love you both. I love you so much, and I never meant for any of this to hurt you." Jamie looked at his mother, this elegant, frightened woman who had shaped his entire life around a lie, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. For the first time in 26 years, he held all the power in this relationship. "Mom," he said quietly, "I need time to process this. All of it." As he walked toward the door, Eleanor's voice followed him, pleading and broken. "Jamie, please don't let this destroy our family. Please don't let my mistakes ruin everything." But Jamie was already wondering if there had ever been a real family to destroy, or just an elaborate performance built on secrets and lies. Jamie drove away from the estate in a daze, Eleanor's desperate pleas still echoing in his rearview mirror. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Connecticut countryside, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was seeing the landscape with new eyes, as if the DNA revelation had shifted not just his understanding of himself, but his entire perception of the world he'd grown up in. 40 miles away, Marcus sat in his penthouse apartment overlooking Hartford's downtown district. A bottle of Macallan 25, a gift from Richard for his last birthday, open on the coffee table before him. The apartment reflected everything he'd thought he was: sleek, expensive, carefully curated to project success and breeding. Now every piece felt like evidence of a fraud he'd unknowingly perpetrated. The silver-framed photo of him with Richard at the Blackwood Industries' 50th anniversary gala mocked him from the side table. Marcus picked it up, studying his father's proud smile, the way Richard's hand rested on his shoulder with such obvious affection. Had it all been a lie? Had Richard somehow known? With a sound somewhere between a roar and a sob, Marcus hurled the frame against the exposed brick wall. Glass exploded across the hardwood floor, and suddenly he was moving through the apartment like a hurricane, destroying everything that bore the Blackwood name or crest. The silver crystal awards, the family signet ring he'd worn with such pride, the business magazines featuring him as Connecticut's rising executive. All of it became debris.
That's how Victoria found him 20 minutes later, using her key to enter an apartment that looked like a war zone. Marcus sat amid the wreckage, still in his expensive suit but disheveled, holding what remained of the Macallan. "Jesus, Marcus, what happened?" Victoria rushed to him, her heels crunching on broken glass. "Are you hurt? Should I call someone?" Marcus looked up at her with eyes she'd never seen before, wild, lost, completely stripped of the confident facade that had first attracted her. "Victoria. Perfect, beautiful Victoria Sterling." His words slurred slightly. "Do you want to know something funny? I'm not who you think I am. I'm not who anyone thinks I am." She knelt beside him carefully, her designer dress catching on a piece of crystal. "Marcus, you're scaring me. What are you talking about?" "DNA doesn't lie, apparently." Marcus laughed bitterly, taking another drink directly from the bottle. 28 years of being groomed to be Richard Blackwood's heir, and it turns out I'm just some bastard artist's son. Jamie, fucking Jamie, is the real Blackwood. The mistake child was me all along. Victoria's mind raced as she processed his words. She'd grown up in Connecticut high society. She understood the implications immediately, not just for Marcus, but for their engagement, their family's merger plans, everything they'd built together. "Marcus, slow down. Explain this to me properly." Her voice remained steady, but Marcus caught something in her tone, a cooling, a subtle distance that hadn't been there before. As he recounted the day's revelations, Victoria found herself studying him with new eyes. Without his confidence, without the Blackwood legacy propping him up, Marcus seemed smaller somehow. The cruel arrogance she'd overlooked as alpha male behavior now appeared as what it really was, the insecurity of someone whose entire identity was borrowed. "So what does this mean?" she asked when he finished.
For us, for the company, for everything. Marcus stared at her, and for the first time, Victoria saw him truly vulnerable. I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. Everything I thought I was, everything we planned, it's all built on a lie. Meanwhile, Jamie had returned to his small apartment in Hartford's Arts District, a converted warehouse space that reflected his actual personality rather than inherited expectations. The exposed pipes and brick walls, the canvases propped against every surface, the books on psychology and art therapy, this was who he really was. And for the first time, that felt like enough. But even here, surrounded by his authentic life, Jamie found himself unable to focus. He'd tried to work on a painting, abstract swirls of blue and gold that usually helped him process complex emotions, but his hands wouldn't steady. The magnitude of what he'd learned kept crashing over him in waves. His phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "How did it go? Call me when you're ready." Instead of calling, Jamie found himself driving to Sarah's apartment in West Hartford. She opened the door before he could knock, as if she'd been watching for him. "You told them," she said immediately, reading his expression. Eleanor knew. She's known for 29 years. Jamie collapsed onto her couch, suddenly exhausted. "Sarah, she watched me suffer through a childhood of feeling like I didn't belong, knowing the entire time that I was the only one who actually did belong." Sarah sat beside him, her presence grounding him in a way that nothing else could. "What did Marcus say?" "He destroyed his apartment and got drunk."
Victoria showed up while I was leaving. I saw her car in the driveway. Jamie ran his hands through his hair. "Sarah, I don't know what to do with this information. Do I challenge the will? Do I demand my rightful inheritance? Do I let Marcus keep living the lie? What do you want to do?" It was such a simple question, but Jamie realized no one had ever asked him that before. His entire life had been shaped by other people's expectations, other people's guilt, other people's secrets. Now, for the first time, he had the power to make choices based on his own desires, rather than his assigned place in the family hierarchy. Back in his penthouse, Marcus had moved to the window, staring down at the city lights with Victoria standing behind him. She'd been researching on her phone, discreetly but thoroughly, learning about inheritance law, paternity challenges, the potential media scandal that could erupt if this became public. "Marcus," she said carefully, "I think we need to consider what this means for our family's business relationship. My father needs to know about any potential instability in Blackwood Industries." Marcus turned, and the look on his face was pure devastation. "There it is. I wondered how long it would take." "What do you mean?" "For you to start protecting the sterling interests over me." His voice was quiet now, drained of fight. "I'm not the golden boy anymore, Victoria. I'm just damaged goods." As the night deepened, both brothers sat in their respective spaces, one amid the wreckage of an identity built on lies, the other contemplating a future built on truth. Neither yet understood that their real test wasn't about who had the right to the Blackwood legacy, but who had the strength to redefine what family meant when everything they'd believed turned out to be false. 3 days after the confrontation at the estate, Jamie found himself staring at his laptop screen in Sarah's apartment, her coffee growing cold beside him as morning light filtered through her windows. The search bar displayed David Chen Artist, New York, and 13,000 results that might hold the key to understanding half of his genetic heritage. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, settling beside him on her couch. She'd taken the day off work, sensing that Jamie needed support for whatever emotional journey he was about to undertake. "I need to know who he is," Jamie replied, clicking on the first result. "For 26 years, I thought my artistic inclinations were some kind of genetic accident. Now I find out they might have come from somewhere specific, from someone real." The David Chen who emerged from their research was nothing like Jamie had imagined. Instead of a struggling artist Eleanor had described, they found a successful gallery owner whose work commanded 5-figure prices in Manhattan's competitive art scene. The Chen Gallery in Soho featured contemporary Asian American artists and David's own paintings, bold, emotional landscapes that seemed to capture the essence of places rather than their literal appearance, were displayed prominently. "Look at this," Sarah pointed to an article from Art News dated 6 months earlier. He's being featured in a retrospective at the Whitney next year. Jamie, this isn't some starving artist who had a brief affair with your mother. This is a serious, established figure in the art world. Jamie studied David's photograph in the article, a distinguished man with graying temples and kind eyes, wearing a simple black shirt in what was obviously his gallery space. The resemblance was undeniable now that Jamie knew to look for it. The same angular jawline, the same way of holding his head slightly tilted when concentrating, even the same long fingers that Jamie had always thought came from nowhere in his family tree. "He looks like me," Jamie whispered, or "I look like him." They spent the morning building a complete picture of David Chen's life. Born in San Francisco to immigrant parents, he'd struggled through art school, spent his 20s painting and waiting tables, slowly building a reputation for work that bridged Eastern and Western artistic traditions. His breakthrough had come in his late 30s, around the time he would have been commissioned to paint Eleanor's portrait. "Here's something interesting," Sarah read from a gallery review. It says his work changed dramatically in the early 1990s, becoming more introspective and emotionally complex. The critic attributes it to personal upheavals that enriched his artistic vision. 1992. The year Marcus was born, when Eleanor would have been pregnant and David would have discovered their affair had consequences he could never have imagined. By noon, they were in Sarah's Honda Civic, driving toward Manhattan with a printed MapQuest direction to the Chen Gallery. Jamie had changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on dark jeans and a button-down shirt. Something that looked respectful but not overdressed, though he wasn't entirely sure why it mattered.
"What's the plan?" Sarah asked as they navigated through Connecticut's increasingly dense traffic. "I don't know. I just want to see him. Understand who he is." Jamie stared at the passenger window at the changing landscape. "Maybe I won't even introduce myself today. Maybe I just need to observe." The Chen Gallery occupied the ground floor of a renovated cast-iron building in Soho, its large windows displaying paintings that seemed to glow with internal light. Jamie stood across the street for 10 minutes, gathering courage, watching well-dressed people move in and out of the space with the casual confidence of Manhattan art lovers. "He's in there," Sarah said softly, pointing through the gallery's main window. David Chen stood near the back of the gallery, discussing a painting with a young woman who was taking notes. Even from a distance, his gestures were familiar, the same way Jamie moved his hands when explaining artistic concepts to his therapy clients, the same unconscious rhythm of someone who thought visually. They crossed the street and entered the gallery, the sophisticated hush of the space immediately enveloping them. David's paintings dominated one wall, landscapes that somehow felt like portraits, capturing not just the physical appearance of places, but their emotional essence. One piece, titled Connecticut Morning, made Jamie's breath catch. It showed a countryside scene that could have been painted from the hills overlooking the Blackwood estate, but rendered with a melancholy that spoke of loss and regret. Powerful work, isn't it? Jamie turned to find a young gallery assistant approaching them, her smile professionally warm. The artist really captures something ineffable about memory and place. "He is very talented," Jamie managed, his voice steadier than he felt. "Has he been with the gallery long?" "Oh, this is his gallery. David Chen is the owner." The assistant's pride was evident. "He's actually here today if you'd like to meet him. He loves talking with people who connect with the work." Jamie's pulse quickened. "What's he like? As a person, I mean." "Wonderful. Thoughtful, generous with his time and knowledge. He mentors young artists, supports community programs. There's a waiting list of people who want to work here, not for the money, just to be around someone with such integrity." As if summoned by their conversation, David Chen approached from across the gallery. Up close, the resemblance was even striking. Jamie found himself looking into eyes that held the same contemplative depth he saw in mirrors, the same slight crease between the brows that appeared when he was thinking deeply. "I couldn't help but notice you studying the Connecticut piece," David said, his voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of childhood bilingualism. "Are you familiar with that area?" "I grew up there." Jamie replied with how natural the conversation felt. "Your painting captures something about the landscape that I've never seen anyone else notice." David's expression grew more attentive. "Really? What do you see in it?" "Longing," Jamie answered without thinking. like someone painting a place they loved but couldn't return to. For a moment, David simply stared at him, and Jamie wondered if he'd revealed too much, been too personal with a stranger. Then David smiled, an expression of such genuine warmth that Jamie felt something inside his chest unknot. "You have an artist's eye. Do you paint?" "I'm an art therapist. I work with children."
Ah, David nodded as if this explained everything. Art as healing, that's noble work. They talked for another 20 minutes about art therapy, the way creativity could help people process trauma. Jamie found himself relaxing in David's presence, feeling understood in a way that was entirely new. This man, his biological father, spoke his language in ways Richard Blackwood never had. Finally, Sarah touched his arm gently. "We should probably head back." As they prepared to leave, David pressed a gallery card into Jamie's hand. "Please come back anytime. It's rare to meet someone who truly sees what I'm trying to express." Walking back to the car, Jamie felt as if the world had shifted again, but this time towards something positive. For the first time in his life, he'd met someone who shared his artistic sensibility, who understood the language of emotion made visible. He hadn't told David who he was, but somehow Jamie felt like his biological father had recognized him anyway. 2 days later, Jamie stood outside the Chen Gallery again, but this time he was alone. Sarah had offered to come for moral support, but this conversation felt like something he needed to face by himself. The gallery card David had given him was worn soft from being turned over in his hands, and Jamie had practiced what he would say dozens of times during the drive from Connecticut. The morning light streaming through the gallery windows made David's painting seem to glow from within. Jamie found David in the back office, bent over what appeared to be shipping paperwork, greeting glasses perched on his nose in a gesture so familiar it made Jamie's chest tighten. "Excuse me." Jamie's voice came out steadier than he felt. David looked up and his face immediately brightened with recognition. "The art therapist from Connecticut. I was hoping you'd come back. I've been thinking about our conversation. Actually, I came back because I need to tell you something about who I am." Jamie stepped into the office, noting the personal touches that made the space feel lived in. Photographs of art installations, a coffee mug with paint stains, sketches pinned to a corkboard. Something in Jamie's tone made David set down his pen and give him full attention. "Please, sit. Would you like coffee?" "My name is Jamie Blackwood," he said without preamble, watching David's face carefully. "Eleanor Blackwood is my mother." The change in David's expression was immediate and profound. Color drained from his face, and he gripped the edge of his desk as if the world had suddenly tilted. For a long moment, neither man spoke. "Eleanor," whispered David finally. "How is she?" "She's complicated." Jamie chose his words carefully. "She's the one who told me about you, about the affair." David removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. "When?" 29 years ago. You painted her portrait." "Yes." David's voice was barely audible. "The commission that changed everything." He looked up at Jamie with new intensity, studying his features.
"Oh my God, you're her son. I'm your son," Jamie finished quietly. The DNA test confirmed it. David stood so abruptly his chair rolled backward, hitting the wall. He moved to the window, staring out at the Soho street scene without really seeing it. "I never knew. Eleanor never told me she was pregnant." "She was already married. From what I understand, your relationship ended before she knew." "It ended because I wanted her to leave Richard." David's voice carried decades of regret. "I was young, idealistic. I thought love was enough to overcome social differences, family expectations. Eleanor was terrified of the scandal, the loss of everything she'd built. I pushed too hard, and she chose security over uncertainty." Jamie found himself studying David's profile, seeing echoes of his own bone structure, his own mannerisms. "She told my father, Richard, that you were both his sons. I grew up believing I was the family disappointment, while my brother Marcus was groomed as the heir." David turned back to face him, his expression stricken.
You have a brother? Legally, yes, but the DNA test revealed he's Richard's biological son and I'm not. Jamie felt strange saying it, claiming his place as David's son while simultaneously explaining how that biological truth had upended everything. Marcus has spent his whole life believing he was the rightful heir to the Blackwood legacy. Finding out the truth has destroyed his sense of identity. And Eleanor let you suffer, thinking you didn't belong? The pain in David's voice was so raw that Janie felt guilty for causing it. She said she was trying to protect everyone by keeping the secret, but I think she was really protecting herself. David sank back into his chair, looking overwhelmed. I have a son. All these years, I have had a son. He studied Janie's face as if memorizing it. Your artistic sensibility, the way you see emotion in painting, it makes sense now. I always felt different from my family, like I was speaking a language they didn't understand. Jamie leaned forward. When I saw your work, when we talked about art as healing, it was the first time I felt truly understood by someone who might share my DNA. Show me your work. Do you have anything with you? Janie pulled out his phone, scrolling to photos of his latest paintings, the abstract pieces he'd been working on to process his family trauma. David studied each image intently, occasionally asking Jamie to zoom in on particular sections. You have your own voice, but I can see the genetic foundation, the way you handle color relationships, the emotional honesty in your brushwork. It's not imitation, it's inheritance. They talked for 2 hours.
David shared stories about his relationship with Eleanor, how she'd commissioned the portrait during what she'd described as a difficult period in her marriage, how their connection had been immediate and intense, how he'd spent months after their breakup painting his heartbreak onto canvas. I kept the portrait, David admitted. I know I should have destroyed it or returned it, but I couldn't. It's in storage upstairs. Eleanor, at 28, radiant and conflicted, and absolutely beautiful. Could I see it? Jamie asked. David hesitated. Are you sure? It might be difficult. 20 minutes later, they stood in David's private studio on the building's second floor, looking at a painting that took Jamie's breath away. Eleanor, nearly 30 years younger, gazed out from the canvas with an expression of longing that seemed to capture everything Jamie now understood about his mother's secret life. She loved you, Jamie said, recognizing the emotion David had captured in her eyes. And I loved her. But love isn't always enough to overcome the practical realities of life. David covered the portrait again with gentle hands. I never stopped wondering what might have been. David? Can I call you David? I don't expect anything from you. I don't need a father figure or financial support. I just wanted you to know that I exist, that Eleanor's choice to keep the secret meant you missed 26 years of knowing you had a son. David turned to face him, tears visible in his eyes. Jamie, I may have missed your childhood, but I don't want to miss anything else. If you're willing, I'd like to know you. I'd like to understand who you've become and maybe share some of who I am. For the first time since learning the truth about his parentage, Jamie felt something other than anger or confusion. He felt hope. Not for what might have been, but for what might still be possible. I'd like that too, he said. As they shook hands, the formal gesture feeling both appropriate and inadequate for the magnitude of their meeting, Jamie realized he'd gained something he'd never expected. Not just the identity of his biological father, but the possibility of a relationship built on choice rather than obligation, on shared understanding rather than family duty. Jamie had barely returned from New York when his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end was smooth, calculating, and disturbingly familiar in its cadence. Jamie, this is your Uncle Thomas. I think it's time we had a conversation. Thomas Blackwood had never called Jamie directly in his 26 years of life. Their interactions had been limited to polite exchanges at family gatherings,
where Thomas had always seemed to regard both nephews with the cool assessment of someone calculating their usefulness. "About what?" Jamie asked, though he suspected he already knew. "About your recent discovery. Word travels fast in our circles, and I understand there have been some revelations regarding family genetics." Thomas's pause was loaded with implication. "I'd like to discuss what this means for Blackwood Industries. Can you meet me for lunch tomorrow?" The Hartford Club was exactly the kind of establishment Jamie had always felt uncomfortable in. Old money carved into mahogany and crystal, where conversations were conducted in low voices and handshake deals determined people's futures. Thomas was already seated at a corner table when Jamie arrived, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit exuding the kind of understated elegance that screamed expensive. "You look more like your father every day," Thomas said as Jamie sat down, though there was something calculated in the observation now. "Richard would be proud of how you've handled the situation with such discretion." "I'm not sure discretion is how I described confronting the family with DNA evidence."
Thomas smiled thinly. But you haven't gone public yet. You haven't contacted the media or challenged the will legally. That shows wisdom. He signaled the waiter for drinks. "Jamie, I've spent 40 years watching this family, and I've learned that blood doesn't always determine worth, but law does determine inheritance." The conversation that followed felt like watching a chess master explain how he'd been planning his moves for decades. Thomas laid out the legal implications of Jamie's discovery with surgical precision. How Richard's will could be challenged on the grounds of fraudulent assumptions. How the company's board of directors would demand answers once they learned the heir apparent wasn't actually an heir. How the media would eventually catch wind of a scandal this significant. "The question," Thomas said, cutting into his salmon with deliberate care, "is whether you want to control this narrative or let it control you." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that you have a legal right to challenge Marcus's inheritance. You're the biological son, which makes you the rightful heir under Connecticut inheritance law." Thomas leaned forward. "I'm also suggesting that you'll need experienced guidance to navigate the legal complexities ahead." Jamie felt a chill of recognition. "And you're offering to provide that guidance?" "I'm offering to protect this family's interests while ensuring you receive what's rightfully yours." Thomas's smile never wavered. "I've been CFO of Blackwood Industries for 15 years. I understand the business better than either you or Marcus ever will. A partnership between us could be mutually beneficial." The conversation left Jamie feeling like he needed a shower. Thomas's offer was seductive in its logic, but the underlying opportunism was unmistakable. His uncle saw the DNA revelation not as a family tragedy, but as a business opportunity. That evening, Jamie's phone exploded with missed calls. Sarah's number appeared repeatedly, along with several unknown numbers that made his stomach clench with foreboding. He called Sarah back first. "Jamie, thank God. There's been a leak. Someone contacted the Hartford Current about the DNA test. They're running a story tomorrow morning." "How is that possible? We haven't told anyone except—" Jamie stopped. "Thomas." Their lunch conversation had been remarkably detailed about the legal implications, suggesting Thomas had already consulted attorneys about the situation. The Hartford Current's morning edition led with a headline that made Jamie's blood run cold. "Blackwood heir apparent, not biological son. DNA tests reveal family scandal." The article was carefully sourced, quoting family insiders and legal experts, while painting a picture of a dynasty built on deception. Marcus was portrayed as the unwitting pretender, Eleanor as the scheming matriarch, and Jamie as the rightful heir emerging from decades of shadows. Jamie's phone rang immediately. Marcus's voice was raw with fury and something that might have been panic. Did you do this? Did you go to the fucking press? Marcus, no, I had nothing to do with bullshit. This story has details only you would know about the art therapy, about my reaction to the DNA results. You destroyed me, Jamie. You actually destroyed me. The line went dead, but Jamie could hear the sound of breaking glass in the background before Marcus hung up.
Victoria's call came an hour later, her voice professionally controlled, but carrying an unmistakable chill. Jamie, I need you to know that the Sterling family will be distancing ourselves from this situation until it's resolved. Our lawyers are reviewing all business partnerships with Blackwood Industries. The corporate implications began cascading within hours. Jamie received a formal letter requesting his presence at an emergency board meeting for Blackwood Industries. 3 major business partners called to reassess their relationships with the company. The company's stock price, while not publicly traded, became the subject of speculation in Connecticut business circles. Eleanor's call was the most devastating. Jamie, sweetheart, I know you must be as shocked as I am about this newspaper story. Her voice was steady, but Jamie could hear the fear underneath. I've had to hire a lawyer. The board is demanding answers, and there are questions about whether I knew Richard's will was based on false information. Mom, I didn't leak this story. I know, darling, but someone did, and now everything is spinning out of control. She paused. Jamie, whatever you decide to do about the inheritance, please consider the collateral damage. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about whether this family survives. That afternoon, Jamie sat in a downtown law office with attorney Margaret Chen, no relation to David, despite the name, listening to her explain his legal options with clinical precision. Your case is exceptionally strong, she said, spreading documents across her conference table. Connecticut law is clear about inheritance rights for biological children. You could challenge the will and likely win a significant portion of the estate. But litigation like this destroys families permanently, and given the media attention, it would be conducted in the public eye. Every detail of your mother's affair, every family conflict, every business decision would become public record. Jamie stared out the law office window at the Hartford skyline, realizing that his simple desire to understand his place in the family had unleashed forces he couldn't control. Thomas was manipulating the situation for his own gain, Marcus was spiraling into self-destruction, Victoria was protecting her family's interests, and Eleanor was facing the consequences of decades-old choices. The DNA test had given him the truth, but the truth was tearing everything apart. For the first time since this began, Jamie wondered if some secrets were meant to stay buried. The week following the media leak felt like living in the eye of a hurricane. Jamie had taken leave from the Children's Therapy Center, unable to concentrate on helping others process trauma, while his own world imploded in slow motion. The Hartford Courier story had been picked up by regional outlets, and suddenly the Blackwood family scandal was being dissected in newspapers across New England. Jamie sat in his apartment, surrounded by half-finished paintings that reflected his emotional chaos, dark swirls of color that seemed to mirror the storm consuming his family. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and distant relatives he hadn't spoken to in years, all wanting their piece of the drama. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. "Mr. Jamie?" 8-year-old Emma's voice was small through the phone. Sarah had given her Jamie's number after the child had insisted on calling her favorite art therapist. "Are you okay? My mom saw you on the news and you looked sad." Jamie found himself smiling for the first time in days. "I'm going through some family troubles, Emma, but thank you for calling. When my parents got divorced, I was really angry at my dad. I drew lots of mean pictures of him, but then my therapist, the one before you, said being angry was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick." The words hit Jamie like a physical force. "That's very wise, Emma." Are you angry at your family? Jamie looked at his latest painting, a violent clash of red and black that he'd titled Betrayal in his mind.
Yes, I think I am.
Maybe you should paint them happy pictures instead. Happy pictures make happy feelings.
After Emma hung up, Jamie stared at his phone for a long time. From the mouths of babes. He'd been so focused on the legal rights, the financial implications, the media circus, that he'd lost sight of what he actually wanted, a family that functioned on truth rather than lies. David called that afternoon, his voice careful and concerned. "I've been following the news coverage. I'm sorry you're going through this." "I've been wondering if I should have left the secret buried," Jamie admitted. "Maybe Eleanor was right to protect it all these years."
Jamie, I've spent 29 years wondering about the life I might have had with Eleanor, the children we might have raised together. Wondering is its own kind of poison. He paused. But I've also learned that you can't build a future on a foundation of lies. The question isn't whether the truth should come out, it's what you do with the truth once it's revealed.
That evening, Sarah arrived with Chinese takeout and the kind of determined expression that meant she was going to force Jamie to talk through his feelings, whether he wanted to or not. "You've been hiding for a week," she said, unpacking containers on his kitchen counter. "Talk to me. What's really going on in your head?" "I have the legal right to take everything from Marcus," Jamie said, accepting the carton of lo mein she handed him. "Attorney Chen says my case is ironclad. I could destroy him completely, legally and financially." But what kind of person does that make me? Marcus spent his entire life believing he was the heir. Yes, he was cruel to me, but he was raised to believe his cruelty was justified. Eleanor manipulated us both.
So what are you thinking?
Jamie set down his chopsticks. "I'm thinking that revenge might be legal, but it's not who I want to be." His phone rang before Sarah could respond. Victoria's name appeared on the screen. A surprise given that she'd been conspicuously absent since the media story broke. "Jamie, I need to speak with you, privately. Can we meet?" They met at a neutral location, a small cafe in West Hartford that was unlikely to attract attention from anyone in their social circles. Victoria looked exhausted, her usual polished appearance slightly frayed around the edges. "I want to discuss a potential solution," she said without preamble. "Something that acknowledges your rights without destroying everyone in the process." "I'm listening." "My family's lawyers have been reviewing the situation. Legally, you have the right to challenge the will and claim a significant portion of the inheritance. But that process will take years, cost millions in legal fees, and destroy both the company and what's left of your family relationships." Victoria pulled out a folder, spreading documents across the small table. "What if there was another way? A private settlement that gives you your rightful share without public litigation." The proposal was surprisingly sophisticated. A restructuring of the company that would give Jamie 40% ownership, Marcus 35%, and Eleanor 25%. A division of liquid assets that would provide Jamie with immediate financial security while leaving Marcus with enough to maintain his lifestyle. Most importantly, a plan that would keep the family business intact while acknowledging the biological reality. "Why are you doing this?" Jamie asked. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "Because I've seen what this is doing to Marcus. He's destroyed his apartment twice this week. He's drinking heavily, making threats against you that his lawyer has advised him not to follow through on. He's becoming someone I don't recognize. And you're protecting him?" "I'm protecting everyone, including you." Victoria leaned forward. "Jamie, if you pursue full legal action, you'll win. But the victory will be Pyrrhic. The company will be damaged, the family will be destroyed, and Marcus will never recover from the public humiliation. Is that really what you want?" That night, Jamie called Eleanor for the first time since the media story broke. Her voice was tentative, fearful of his anger. "Mom, I want you to know that I didn't leak the story to the press." "I know, sweetheart. I think I know who did." Eleanor's voice carried a bitterness Jamie had never heard before. "Your Uncle Thomas has been remarkably well informed about legal strategies for someone who should have been as surprised as the rest of us. He's been pushing me to pursue the full inheritance, says he wants to protect the family interests." Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it.
Thomas has been waiting for 40 years for a chance to control Blackwood Industries. He's using your discovery as an opportunity to marginalize both you and Marcus while positioning himself as the reasonable voice of stability. The pieces clicked into place. Thomas had leaked the story to force Jamie's hand, betting that either Jamie would pursue vindictive legal action that would destroy Marcus, or that the family would fracture completely, leaving Thomas to pick up the pieces. "Mom, I'm calling a family meeting tomorrow at the estate. Everyone needs to be there. You, Marcus, Thomas. I'm going to put an end to this." "Jamie, what are you planning?" For the first time in weeks, Jamie felt completely certain about his next move. "I'm planning to be the adult in this family since no one else seems capable of it." After hanging up, Jamie looked at Emma's words, which he'd written on a piece of paper and taped to his bathroom mirror. "Happy pictures make happy feelings." Tomorrow, he would paint his family a different picture entirely.
Are you okay? My mom saw you on the news, and you looked sad. Jamie found himself smiling for the first time in days. I'm going through some family troubles, Emma, but thank you for calling. When my parents got divorced, I was really angry at my dad, Emma said, with the matter-of-fact wisdom that children sometimes possessed. I drew lots of mean pictures of him, but then my therapist, the one before you, said being angry was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. The words hit Jamie like a physical force. That's very wise, Emma. Are you angry at your family? Jamie looked at his latest painting, a violent clash of red and black that he'd titled Betrayal in his mind. Yes, I think I am. Maybe you should paint them happy pictures instead. Happy pictures make happy feelings. After Emma hung up, Jamie stared at his phone for a long time, from the mouths of babes. He'd been so focused on the legal rights, the financial implications, the media circus, that he'd lost sight of what he actually wanted, a family that functioned on truth rather than lies. David called that afternoon, his voice careful and concerned. I've been following the news coverage. I'm sorry you're going through this. I've been wondering if I should have left the secret buried, Jamie admitted. Maybe Eleanor was right to protect it all these years. Jamie, I've spent 29 years wondering about the life I might have had with Eleanor, the children we might have raised together. Wondering is its own kind of poison. David paused. But I have also learned that you can't build a future on a foundation of lies. The question isn't whether the truth should come out, it's what you do with the truth once it's revealed. That evening, Sarah arrived with Chinese takeout and the kind of determined expression that meant she was going to force Jamie to talk through his feelings, whether he wanted to or not. You've been hiding for a week, she said, unpacking containers on his kitchen counter. Talk to me. What's really going on in your head? I have the legal right to take everything from Marcus, Jamie said, accepting the carton of lo mein she handed him. Attorney Chen says my case is ironclad. I could destroy him completely, legally and financially. But what kind of person does that make me? Marcus spent his entire life believing he was the heir. Yes, he was cruel to me, but he was raised to believe his cruelty was justified. Eleanor manipulated us both. So, what are you thinking? Jamie set down his chopsticks. I'm thinking that revenge might be legal, but it's not who I want to be. His phone rang before Sarah could respond. Victoria's name appeared on the screen. A surprise, given that she'd been conspicuously absent since the media story broke. Jamie, I need to speak with you, privately. Can we meet?
They met at a neutral location, a small cafe in West Hartford that was unlikely to attract attention from anyone in their social circles. Victoria looked exhausted, her usual polished appearance slightly frayed around the edges. I want to discuss a potential solution, she said without preamble. Something that acknowledges your rights without destroying everyone in the process. I'm listening. My family's lawyers have been reviewing the situation. Legally, you have the right to challenge the will and claim a significant portion of the inheritance. But that process will take years, cost millions in legal fees, and destroy both the company and what's left of your family relationships. Victoria pulled out a folder, spreading documents across the small table. What if there was another way? A private settlement that gives you your rightful share without public litigation. The proposal was surprisingly sophisticated. A restructuring of the company that would give Jamie 40% ownership, Marcus 35%, and Eleanor 25%. A division of liquid assets that would provide Jamie with immediate financial security while leaving Marcus with enough to maintain his lifestyle. Most importantly, a plan that would keep the family business intact while acknowledging the biological reality. "Why are you doing this?" Jamie asked. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "Because I've seen what this is doing to Marcus. He's destroyed his apartment twice this week. He's drinking heavily, making threats against you that his lawyer has advised him not to follow through on. He's becoming someone I don't recognize." "And you're protecting him?" "I'm protecting everyone, including you." Victoria leaned forward. "Jamie, if you pursue full legal action, you'll win. But the victory will be Pyrrhic. The company will be damaged, the family will be destroyed, and Marcus will never recover from the public humiliation. Is that really what you want?" That night, Jamie called Eleanor for the first time since the media story broke. Her voice was tentative, fearful of his anger. "Mom, I want you to know that I didn't leak the story to the press." "I know, sweetheart. I think I know who did." Eleanor's voice carried a bitterness Jamie had never heard before. "Your Uncle Thomas has been remarkably well-informed about legal strategies for someone who should have been as surprised as the rest of us. He's been pushing me to pursue the full inheritance, says he wants to protect the family interests." Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Thomas has been waiting for 40 years for a chance to control Blackwood Industries. He's using your discovery as an opportunity to marginalize both you and Marcus while positioning himself as the reasonable voice of stability." The pieces clicked into place. Thomas had leaked the story to force Jamie's hand, betting that either Jamie would pursue vindictive legal action that would destroy Marcus, or that the family would fracture completely, leaving Thomas to pick up the pieces. "Mom, I'm calling a family meeting. Tomorrow, at the estate. Everyone needs to be there. You, Marcus, Thomas. I'm going to put an end to this." "Jamie, what are you planning?" For the first time in weeks, Jamie felt completely certain about his next move.
"I'm planning to be the adult in this family, since no one else seems capable of it." After hanging up, Jamie looked at Emma's words, which he'd written on a piece of paper and taped to his bathroom mirror. "Happy pictures make happy feelings." Tomorrow, he would paint his family a different picture entirely. The library of the Blackwood estate felt different when Jamie entered it the next morning. The same mahogany panels and leather-bound books surrounded him, but the oppressive weight of family secrets had lifted, replaced by something lighter, possibility. Eleanor was already seated in her usual chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Thomas arrived precisely on time, his confident stride faltering slightly when he saw the determined set of Jamie's shoulders. Marcus came last, looking haggard, but sober, his eyes carrying a wariness that hadn't been there a month ago. "Thank you all for coming," Jamie began, standing before the same fireplace where his father's portrait hung, a man who had genuinely believed Marcus was his biological son and had loved him accordingly. "I asked you here because I've made a decision about how we move forward." Thomas leaned forward expectantly. "I hope you've considered our conversation about legal action. Time is critical if we want to—" "Uncle Thomas, you leaked the story to the Hartford Courant." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Thomas's carefully maintained composure cracked for just a moment, long enough for everyone to see the truth in his expression. "That's a serious allegation without. You've been maneuvering for control of Blackwood Industries since Dad died. You saw my discovery as an opportunity to either pit Marcus and me against each other or position yourself as the stabilizing force after we destroyed each other. Unfortunately for you, I'm not interested in being anyone's pawn." Eleanor stared at her brother-in-law with undisguised disgust. "Thomas, how could you exploit our family's pain for your own game?" "Someone had to think strategically about the company's future," Thomas replied, his mask finally dropping completely. "You've all been too emotional to see the bigger picture." "The bigger picture," Jamie said, "is that this family has been torn apart by lies, manipulation, and people putting their own interests first. That ends today." He moved to the center of the room, addressing each family member directly. "Marcus, you spent 28 years believing you were the rightful heir, and you shaped your entire identity around that belief. Learning the truth has been devastating, and I'm partly responsible for that devastation." Marcus looked up, surprise flickering across his features. "But I'm also Richard Blackwood's biological son, which makes me the legal heir under Connecticut law. I could pursue full legal action and claim the majority of the inheritance. I could destroy you financially and professionally." He paused. "I'm not going to do that." The room was silent, except for the grandfather clock's steady ticking. "Instead, I'm proposing we restructure everything based on truth rather than deception. We split the inheritance equally, 50-50. We restructure Blackwood Industries as equal partners, each bringing our own strengths to the business." Marcus stood upright. "I don't want your pity, Jamie. I don't need—" "This isn't pity, it's justice." Jamie's voice remained steady. "You were raised to run this company. You have skills, relationships, and knowledge that I don't possess. But I have perspective, creativity, and connections to parts of the community that Dad never reached. Together, we could build something better than what either of us could accomplish alone." Eleanor wiped tears from her eyes. "Jamie, that's incredibly generous. But what about the legal complications, the media attention?"
We handle it honestly. We acknowledge that family dynamics were based on incomplete information, and we're correcting course based on new knowledge. We show the business community and the media that the Blackwood family can adapt and grow stronger through adversity. Thomas stood to leave. "This is foolishly idealistic. You're giving up millions of dollars out of some misguided sense of family loyalty." "Uncle Thomas," Jamie said quietly, "you're no longer welcome in company decisions. Your position as CFO is terminated, effective immediately. We'll be conducting an audit of all financial transactions you've overseen in the past 5 years." After Thomas left, the remaining family members sat in contemplative silence. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Why?" His voice was hoarse. "After everything I said to you, everything I put you through, why would you offer me this?" "Because," Jamie said, "Emma, one of my art therapy clients, reminded me that being angry is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. I don't want to be poisoned by anger anymore." Over the following months, the transformation was gradual but genuine. Marcus entered therapy to address his identity crisis and the cruel behaviors he'd developed over the years. Victoria, initially skeptical, found herself drawn to the humbler, more self-aware version of Marcus that emerged from his psychological work. Their engagement survived, but on new terms, built on authenticity rather than social positioning. Eleanor faced social consequences for her decades-long deception. Some friendships ended, and her position in certain Connecticut society circles was permanently damaged. But she gained something more valuable: honest relationships with both her sons. She began attending family therapy sessions, working to understand how her choices had shaped both Jamie and Marcus's development. David became a regular presence in Jamie's life, but carefully and respectfully. He attended family gatherings when invited, shared his artistic knowledge, and slowly built the father-son relationship they'd both missed. His relationship with Eleanor remained cordial but distant. Too much pain and time had passed for romantic reconciliation, but they found peace in their shared love for Jamie. Sarah, who had supported Jamie through every revelation and decision, finally heard the words she'd waited years to hear during a quiet dinner at her apartment 6 months after the family meeting.
Sarah, I've spent my whole life not knowing who I really was, Jamie said, taking her hand across the small table. But I've always known who you are, the person who saw me for who I could become, not who I was supposed to be. I love you. 1 year later, the Blackwood family gathered for a memorial service honoring Richard, not the idealized patriarch of family mythology, but the flawed man who had genuinely loved his sons and built something lasting despite his limitations. The service was small, private, and honest about both Richard's achievements and his blind spots. Jamie spoke at the service, his words capturing the family's journey. Dad wasn't perfect, and neither are we. But he taught us that family legacies aren't just about money or business success. They're about the values we choose to carry forward and the relationships we choose to build. As the family stood together afterward, Jamie realized that the DNA test had given him something more valuable than inheritance rights. It had given them all the opportunity to choose who they wanted to be, rather than simply accepting who they thought they were supposed to be. The mistake child had become the family's salvation, not through revenge, but through the radical act of forgiveness.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up.